Hello and good morning. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm Rabia Tabassum, Senior Research Associate from SDPI. On behalf of SDPI, I welcome all you on today's session on education for vulnerable groups in Pakistan. This session is a collaborative effort of SDPI and GIZ EHS team. I would like to thank you all, the distinguished panelists. Today we have with us Mr. Shehbaz Tahir Nadeem. He's Special Secretary, Elementary and Secondary Department, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. He is a civil servant, civil service officer and member of Pakistan Administrative Service. Presently working as Special Secretary, and he has extensive experience with educational department at local level as well. At his current position, he is serving at a strategic management role at provincial level education and administration, policy, and development reforms. We have also Commissioner of Afghan Refugees, KP, Mr. Abbas Khan. He is a civil servant with 22 years of experience in different ministries and departments, with a special focus on youth development, education, and forced migration. He was part of the team, and he drafted Pakistan's first national youth policy. Recently, he had drafted Refugee Youth Development Policy for Commissionerate for Afghan Refugees, and also established Education and Youth Development Cell at his department. Thank you, sir. We are also joined online by Ms. Bela Raza Jamil, CEO, ITA, Lahore, Pakistan. She is a public policy specialist and an activist. She is the former technical advisor to the Federal Ministry of Education, Pakistan. Bela has worked with the provincial and federal government, advising on education sector reforms and policies. We have also Dr. Fariha, a research fellow at SDPI. She is a PhD economics and trainer of BCure. BCure is basically building capacity using research evidence. Currently, she has done a study on randomized controlled trial study that was awarded by the Aztec Hub Consortium and ODI UK as a lead investigator. She also worked in Higher Education Commission of Pakistan. We will also be joined by Ms. Fajr Rabia Pasha. She is Executive Director of Pakistan Alliance for Girls Education, Islamabad. She is one of the leading advocates for strengthening education phenomena for girls in Pakistan. She has been lifelong champion of girls' education and their rights. Ms. Pasha recently recognized as the top 50 key global influencers. So I will start with the introduction of the panel. Today's session basically aims to have a discussion on education for vulnerable groups in Pakistan by engaging people from, including officials from education departments, practitioners, and experts as well. Next slide, please. As you can see here, the closure of educational institutions after COVID across Pakistan had significant implications on education disparities. Given the fact that Pakistan is the country with highest out-of-school children, and 49% girls of school are out of school compared to the 40% boys. 41% of girls compared to 33% boys dropped out of school before completing their primary education. And regional disparities is another policy concern, as among out of school children, 37% are from rural areas and compared to 22% in urban areas. Similarly, Afghan refugees, children from Afghan refugees is another concern for policymakers as well. According to an estimate, 80% of registered school-going age Afghan refugees children are out of school. In addition to the education access, retention, another major concern is the learning outcomes of students. As you can see here, Aztec response in the form of TV and online apps during the pandemic made remote learning impossible for 23% children and 36% youth in Pakistan. And now further to elaborate on this, I will request Ms. Amna Zaidi. She is Senior Research Associate and moderate of today's session as well, to please start this discussion. Thank you, Amna.
Thank you. Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you. I would definitely not be presumptuous enough to comment further. I will stick to my moderation duties. Ms. Bela, I believe you're with us online. I would like to start with you. If you heard my colleague, she talked about learning poverty levels, and we know that ITA's work has significantly looked at both learning outcomes as well as learning poverty. If I could request you to speak to the overall adequacy of the education system in Pakistan in terms of delivering education, particularly to marginalized segments, and in light of COVID and how that has impacted or exacerbated learning poverty levels. Can you hear us, Ms.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, very much so.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much to SDPI and GIZ for inviting me and to be in the company of such august speakers and eminent speakers. I'll get straight to the point because there is a lot to be covered. Know very well, and you framed it well. But I just want to again remind ourselves that our net enrollment rate, according to PSLMS 2019-20, is 64% at primary level, 37% at middle level, and 27% at metric level. And for early years, it is about 32%. Now, when you look at this kind of a challenge of numbers of children who should be in school and are not in school, we have it exacerbated when we are looking at, does children being in school mean that they are also learning? No, that is not true. And as you know from the ASER surveys since 2010, we've been repeatedly pointing out the challenge of learning, which is outcomes, which has been there because we are using a floor level instrument of ASER, which is grade 2 level competencies in Urdu, Sindhi, Pashto, English, and Arabic. And when we see that our children who are still 45% in grade 5 not being able to do grade 2 level, we are of course alarmed. This time, under the COVID pandemic and the crisis of COVID, we were quite active. We have done 3 surveys and the 4th is about to be finished. We had done surveys on early learning in February and March. We then did a 16 district survey, 4 districts each from each of the provinces, for which the results were out on the 20th of October, which was collaboratively done with UNICEF. And then we did, for the first time ever, an urban slums Kattiabadi surveys in 114 Kattiabadis in Karachi and in Lahore as a pilot. And I think we should scale it up. What comes out clearly, as we knew pre-COVID, so the crisis of learning pre-COVID, if you look at the learning poverty rate, it was 75% for Pakistan for age 10-year-olds who could not read with understanding, compared to, say, 58% in South Asia. So already Pakistan was at a much higher rate in learning poverty than South Asia. And by the estimates of the World Bank, this may have gone up to another 10%, so about 80%, 85%. The results that we have, and so we are seeing definitely learning losses. So if we look at grades 3, grades 5 and 8 compared to 2019 data of ASER, we've seen a dip in the learning. But I want to really flag, because we have got policymakers here and decision makers, the grade 3 crisis. In grade 3, for example, if I take arithmetic, this is the 16 district survey. A 7% drop from 17% as it is. This is 2-digit division. So as it is, our grade 3 is not very sturdy on learning, but imagine having another 7% drop. And similarly, for all other subjects, the drops are significant for grade 3. I'm posing the question bold and loudly, does this mean that grade 3 today is going to be our lost generation? And if we are not careful, it could be grade 4 as well. And this doesn't augur too brilliantly when we are coming to the issue of how to address the learning loss. I'll finish with on the learning loss issue with the data on urban slums. And in urban slums, as you know, these are both regularized or unregularized Kachchi Abadis. And generally speaking, our education departments, and I really want to challenge education departments, we are not planning for urban very well ever. We just left it to private sector or others, and peripherally we work for urban planning. But in places like this where we see big challenges, I wanted to share with you, not only are we presented with challenges of learning in urban slums, and this is for 5 to 16-year-olds, but in a place like Karachi, say Karachi West, which is the towns of Orangi and Liari and all of that, 1/4 of the children, this is alarming, go to madrasas. And the learning level in madrasas is shocking. The learning levels of madrasas in grades from age 5 to 16 comes at 7.4% for Urdu and Sindhi and Pashto, arithmetic 4.4%, and English 10%. And that is shocking because we are looking at data from the madrasas because we keep talking about the diversity of our system and the fact that we have our system divided in 3 camps or 3 buckets of madrasas, private schools, and government schools. Well, the madrasas are currently in dire trouble. And we need to probe in this further because we are not only looking at learning challenges and learning losses during this period of most of our children. Madrasas, who is going to do that? When it comes to issues of the survey that we did, whilst we look at it, we look at the intersectionality in these areas, particularly in the urban slums. And I do want to say that 40% currently of our all urban areas comprise urban slums. In a place like Karachi, it is more than 60% of the total population of Karachi lives in urban slums. And with little planning, but also the intersectionality of urban areas, poverty, lack of services, the burden of lack of services falling on women and the gender violence that results because water is not there, bijli nahi mil rahi, what people have to do, and the kind of stress because of lack of livelihoods, this becomes a very big challenge. And don't forget, the verticality in urban slums means there's heat and cold and weather issues, which leads to climate change challenges as well. But what is the silver lining? The silver lining is that we have in this survey found that 63% of the children in all our surveys and very high numbers of parents being engaged with their children's learning. So they were worried. And our usual thing, parents who are illiterate or semi-literate do not or are not interested in children's learning. In COVID period, it showed that in fact they were. In fact, the distance between the schools and the homes has narrowed and the gap has been bridged. Can we sustain that? That's one point, because the parents were definitely interested, and that's a social capital we need to build on if we want to look at ways of improving and addressing our provision of education, particularly for disadvantaged segment of Karachi, of Pakistan, and for learning possibilities. But also the fact that we saw in the surveys that we've done that while 35% of our children, our total numbers, were looking at television for their learning, which is a large number. So if you look at about 40 million plus children and in that age group and look at 35% or 32% looking at TV, I think that's a good thing. We need to build on something like that. But of course, when we are looking at availability of cell phones, which is very high, both in rural and urban, and of smartphones, which is not that high, but still available and growing, we need to, of course, always look at disadvantaged groups through the wealth ranking. Now, that wealth ranking is already available under ASAR. I'll send you the links. But what you see is very different reality of the ultra poor versus the poor to the rich and the richest. And that nuanced understanding we need to have when we are coming up with how and what ways we can address the issue of learning losses. I do want to address this all leads to a focus on systems. But certainly the largest focus is our teachers. And in the workforce, we must remember that after the first 5 months, when everybody was told to sit at home, the government rebounded with a huge amount of focus on supporting teachers with their edtech skills, their technology capabilities. They got hundreds and thousands of licenses from Microsoft and trained the teachers for online. So we have on the workforce side a situation where certainly they are not, just like the children and the society is very different. The teachers today are, I think, also turning a page in terms of their skill sets that the government is insisting, and the government is facilitating them to be able to become more savvy in what would be distance learning, right from having learning packs, going to homes, or to learn different kinds of technologies. This, I think, needs to be taken into account, because we have the big issues of how are we going to address the issues of teachers in all of this in a very unequal society where wealth matters, where geography matters, where gender matters. And in most of the data, by the way, the girls are coming much below down boys, except for urban slums. In urban slums, the girls are doing better. The girls are doing better than boys, slightly better than boys. And we need to be able to pick on some of those aspects to see how do we address these key issues. So what are our key takeaways? If we want to address issues of education provision and learning for disadvantaged segments of society, we need to first of all understand that today education, after these 2 years of a very hard time, but also some silver linings and COVID dividends, such as our acceleration of edtech solutions, and I see the spectrum. And by the way, radio comes out less than 3 or 4% usage in Pakistan. For some reason, that's how it is. But what we are seeing is a spectrum of options emerging in education and learning. But first of all, we need to have a new compact for education between the children, the teachers, and the parents or the larger communities. And that is a very critical point, because for many years after 72 nationalization, we kept the parents out and by and large from the learning systems, and kept the school as a closed system. The schools are now open systems. How do we address that? Second point, when it comes to issues of learning, please let us not be in a panic.
We're down to the last minute now.
Yes, last minute. So please, the 3 buckets of learning. There is a catch-up program for accelerated and learning for learning losses, remedial support, which must be managed by academic, of course, content, and thirdly, by life skills and social emotional skills. The third aspect is looking at teachers from a new lens, a new fresh lens, where teachers need to be skilled up further and invested further. And finally, systems lens. The system lens means that there must be better financing and sustained financing for education in this new compact, and to be able to see how you can think of not just edtech coming from donors and industry, but the government building up sturdy budgets for edtech and distance learning solutions, along with systems which will look at the most vulnerable, especially in the poorest of the districts, as well as in urban slums. I will stop at that.
Thank you so much. You've so comprehensively framed the issue. I would particularly like to pick up on the fact how you talked about that the urban planning for education is rather dismal. It's a divisive educational streams in Pakistan. And within that framework, I'd like to take this to Dr. Fariha. And if you could talk about how the experience of remote learning and education technology has been during COVID, and if that has helped at all. Particularly keeping in mind that there are at least three educational streams in Pakistan functioning simultaneously. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amna. It's a pleasure to share the floor with Ms. Bela Raza Jamil and also with the panelists who have joined us in person. So I would be talking about the study that I have recently done, since it is very much aligned with today's topic of education for the vulnerable groups and the impact that COVID has created. So we had the opportunity of doing this study for EdTech Hub Consortium funded by UKAID and World Bank. And the study is titled Investigating the Impact on Learning Outcomes Through the Use of Education Technology During COVID-19, Evidence from a Randomized Controlled Trial in the Punjab province of Pakistan. So we actually chose our target area was the economically disadvantaged area of South Punjab. We did this study in the Bahawalpur division, where we actually took the district of Bahawalnagar and all the tehsils that are part of it. And the target audience was the secondary school students who belong to economically disadvantaged household. Somehow, the schools that we chose were essentially the private schools because during the pandemic, during COVID, there was no online education that was imparted in public schools in that landscape of South Punjab, and the entire public school system went to a complete closure. So what we tried to, what our main objective of the study was to explore how EdTech education technology may impact and help achieve the objective of learning enhancement in the students of economically disadvantaged region during COVID-19 school closures. So it was an experimental study, and we actually administered 3 interventions. We tried this very celebrated pedagogical approach of teaching at the right level. And just I would like to mention it a bit what it means. Normally, we consider enrollment rate as an indicator of secondary, primary, or tertiary education, whereas in evidence-based policy design, it's all about the learning level, it's all about the learning curves. And this phenomena has been very well highlighted by USER over time. It's a great contribution of USER to the educational landscape, how they have pointed out that if uh, students of grade 5 are not able to attempt a grade 2 mathematical problem, or they're not able to read a sentence of Urdu as per grade 2 level, it means that fragile learning levels are existing, and this is not the right kind of education that's being imparted. So there's a dearth of learning level. So this is the main theme about this intervention, that it actually tests student according to their learning level, and then through additional teaching, through additional effective teaching, it can be after school hours, in school hours, or through summer camps, these the learning level of these students are enhanced. Second intervention that we administered was the teachers' effectiveness. By we actually continued for a number of months with the teaching at right level approach for students, where additional learning was given to them through customized videos in Urdu, mathematics, and English. Then we actually concentrated our efforts on the capacity building of the teachers, where we actually trained teachers through digital training sessions online, in taking assessments by actually exposing them to the cutting edge apps of CK12, of Study Ladder, of how to use Zoom and the basic tools of Microsoft Office. And then the third intervention that we introduced, which we experimented with, was students' motivation. We actually administered fortnightly tests to students through digital medium to actually incentivize them in taking undergoing repetitive testing and coming up with better learning levels. So all this was done through an online medium, since we were actually investigating the role of education technology. And also when we went in, when we did the baseline survey in that disadvantaged area of South Punjab, we came to know that very little number of students, they have access to laptops or computers. But one tool that was consistent among all households was ownership of mobile phone, whether it was a smartphone or the other phone that that only comes with simple calls but not WhatsApp. So we administered these interventions of TAL through WhatsApp medium, and by calling teachers on Zoom, connecting through their smartphones for digital training sessions, and also sending these students the fortnightly test through WhatsApp, with looping in the parents as well, and asking for the support of parents. And the inferences we got, these experiments, they went on for a couple of months, and the inferences we got were very striking. First of all, it was a relief that we had this expectation that probably these students of class 7th and 8th, they might have very fragile learning levels. So we administered the ACER standardized tool on them. And thankfully, they were all able to attempt it. This was one of the very striking aspect. We were we had this anticipation that probably we will have very fragile learning levels and they won't be able to even attempt a grade 2 ACER test. But ACER standardized test, it came out to be redundant in Bahawalpur, in Bahawalnagar region. They were all above 90% of them, they were all able to attempt a grade 2 ACER. And I'm talking about the students of grade 7th and 8th. Then we actually went for grade appropriate test, and it was there where we actually identified the learning lags. And then we actually tailored our intervention where we actually provided additional training material as per the results of grade appropriate tests. Another inference that was very striking or alarming was that there were gender inequalities and gender disparities. When we asked the parents about any gender discrimination in terms of girls' access for edtech tools in terms of education, they stated that there is no discrimination. They have equal preference for a male child or a girl child if a smartphone is to be given to them to access online class or homework. But when we had focus group discussion with the teachers of these students, the teachers highlighted this aspect that parents have an implicit bias. They do not want to admit it, but there is some serious discrimination in terms of access of a girl child for a smartphone or educational tool, inclusive of laptops, which fewer household had. So that was another inference that we had. Again, another aspect was that parents normally see smartphones or TV and teleschool or computers as a source of entertainment rather than as a source for imparting education. We had very few students in the sample who actually went for viewing the teleschool. Again, this generates a lot of evidence that what kind of mediums should be used, and the mediums should be tailored according to the type of population and on the ground evidence. And also, there was a sound evidence that there was a lot of dropping out of children, since a majority of these students belong to household where the father was a daily wager or a small scale farmer or unemployed, and the income brackets of the households were within 5,000 to 30,000 rupees, majorly for the entire sample. So, and when we investigated about these dropouts, we came to know that majority of these dropouts, it translated into child labor. Children were taken out of school because parents were not able to pay the fee. In one school, we were given a number by the principal that nearly 240 dropouts took place, and more than 200 were engaged in child labor in actually the fields of Bahawalnagar for farming purposes or to support their fathers in this daily wager activities. So these were some of the inferences, but what we found out that teaching at right level pedagogical approach, it really works. It was significantly positive. It enhanced the learning levels in mathematics. It enhanced the learning levels in Urdu, and also capacity building of teachers is essential. Again, that also came out to be significantly positive. And the medium that is to be used for leveraging any intervention on enhancing learning level, it has to be through teachers. There's still a mindset that needs to be changed concerning digital mediums. Television, for sure, in these disadvantaged area is not seen as a learning tool. Parents, they have apprehension about access of digital tools to their students, to their children. And there's a lot of policy making that needs to be done when we talk about the learning levels of the vulnerable groups. Further, we believe that TAL must not be seen in isolation. It should be part of primary or secondary syllabus to a certain extent. Although, for sure, we need more evidence. It cannot be concluded on just this RCT. But again, when we talk about randomized controlled trial, in literature, it is referred as the gold standard of evidence. In impact evaluation, RCT is referred as gold standard of evidence. No evidence can be more profound than an RCT evidence, because there is a very distinction of control and treatment groups and how these experiments go on for months, and then the results are derived. So this is what I have to say about the learning levels of the vulnerable groups. A lot of evidence-based work need to go into it. And again, I would like to acknowledge the work done by Acer, because it was very helpful for our studies. This is exactly the kind of evidence-based uh, the data collection and work that is needed in this evidence space, where we are actually grappling with this fact that we are one of the second largest country in the world with out-of-school children and fragile learning levels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saria. This study sounds extremely interesting. I, for one, am very tempted to go through the findings again in detail. I specifically, if I pick up on the fact that both you and Ms. Bela have talked about mobile and smartphone penetration, and we all know that as for laptops, that's rather dismal right now. But even with mobile and smartphones penetration, it's a positive trend. It's on the rise. But I believe this penetration is not as deep in all marginalized sections. And speaking of that, I would like to take my next question to Mr. Abbas Khan and narrow this population down further. If we talk about out of school Afghan children and how COVID has impacted their learning levels, and what measures are being taken to address their learning problems right now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for having me here on a very important occasion. I'm very pleased and very honored to be speaking on a subject which is quite close to our hearts. Before I speak any further, I would like to applaud and appreciate our two panelists who spoke so well on the importance of education, the impact of COVID, and especially in the urban slums and the marginalized communities. Afghan refugees, Pakistan has been very proudly hosting millions of Afghan citizens on our soil for the last 4 decades. As we speak today, we have actually entered the 5th decade of this hospitality. Pakistan has been extending its different services to refugees, both in the camps as well as in the urban areas, according to its limitations and capabilities. But the international community and the UN agencies, especially GIZ, has always been there and supporting us. But even with a lot of support from the international community, the figures that were shown today in the presentation by Ms. Rabia Tabassum, actually it tells the entire story. In a population of 1.4 million registered Afghan citizens, and by the way, there are different categories of Afghan citizens in Pakistan. There are POR card holders, 1.4 million, then there are ACC card holders, which are around 800,000, and then again we have around 1 million undocumented Afghans. So taken together, we have more than 3 million Afghan citizens of different categories. Now these categories have created a lot of challenges. If you are a POR card holder, then you are eligible and you have access to different services, including education. But if you are not a POR card holder, if you have an ACC card or undocumented, then you have a lot of challenges even accessing primary education. So 37% of the total caseload is school-going age group in this caseload. And the figures that almost 80% are out of school, it's actually, a very, very serious situation. We all know that if you are if you are a migrant, if you've been forcefully displaced, then you're already a vulnerable, segment. Before I speak on the challenges that COVID has actually, created for education of refugees. We need to understand that almost 30% of the refugees are living in designated refugee camps, or we call them refugee villages. The remaining 70% are living in urban or semi-urban slums, mostly, together. Uh, the profile of this population is very interesting. Almost 60% are under the age of 30, and 72% are women and children. So there is a lot of vulnerability already existing in this community. UNHCR, through the support of donors, is extending services, education services in the camps. But the refugees, almost 70%, are on their own if you're living in the urban centers. Some refugees have opened up their self-help private schools, in which we have around 36,000 students enrolled. UNHCR is running around 101 schools in these camps, in which we have around 30 to 40,000 students enrolled. But the dropout is tremendous. And this COVID has actually, enhanced these challenges, because with the closure of schools, probably, UNHCR run school can be supported by the donor funding. But the private schools run by refugees, they were mostly closed down, because if you don't have the funding or the finances, you cannot even pay your teachers. So some of the schools survived, but the majority of the schools actually closed down. Economics, the social and economic challenges the refugees face are one of the biggest hurdles in access to education. While we have access, some of the privileged class students, they have access to technology, but majority of the Afghan refugees, they don't have access to technology. Very little, percentage has access. So, if the schools are closed down and you don't have access through technology, and your parents have lost their jobs, and there are no social support structures available for this segment of the society like we have. So most of the children that we normally saw in studying in the schools, we now see them polishing shoes or washing cars, working as child laborers. So the situation for Afghan refugees in terms of the impact of COVID has been extremely negative, and we expect from the international donor community, because expecting anything from Pakistan to support the refugees any further would be a big, a high call. We all know that 22.8 million Pakistani students are already out of school. Now, this is not a small number. This is almost the size of Australia. So, we have our own challenges. And the refugees issue is a global, responsibility. It is not the responsibility only of Pakistan. It is the responsibility of the international community to come forward and extend support in whatever way we can. What we are doing to counter the negative impact of COVID, we have, currently we are working on accelerated learning programs for, especially for female refugees who are, sitting idle in their homes and have no access to education. So we are hoping that we can complete this 5 year of primary education in a squeezed 32 months of programs. We are also introducing technology in some of our schools. It needs a lot of resources, and it needs a lot of skills and training. But at least we have started doing that, and probably in the long run, technology will be an integral part of the refugee education system. Apart from that, we are also extending trainings to different teachers in these schools. We must remember that the refugees were actually given education in their curriculum, the Afghan curriculum, and it was only recent, like 2 years back, that we shifted to the Pakistani curriculum. So they were already facing challenges in terms of trained teachers for the new curriculum and books and access to other services. But the closure of schools has negatively impacted the refugee education, and we need to actually flag this thing. We need to raise this thing, especially with the international donor community, that they should not forget about the education of refugees and the vulnerable groups, especially in situation which has actually increased the challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That has been quite eye-opening, actually. Not as positive as we'd hope, but I'd like to take my next question to Ms. Basha. I also believe we have called you in on your birthday. Is that correct?
That's right. Thank you.
Happy birthday. So we'll start with that.
Thank you.
Apologies for dragging you out this early. But based on your organization page's experience and what Mr. Abbas Khan also said, that it's really important for education to be inclusive. And I know that page specifically looks at gender as well as other marginalized segments. Could you shed light on what, if there are any other exogenous factors, perhaps socioeconomic or cultural barriers that have even further hindered the access to education and learning levels during the time of COVID?
Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today on my birthday. It's a day that I generally take off, but if Rabia calls me, then I have to be here. So,
We definitely appreciate your time.
So I think first of all, as brother has already mentioned, that pandemic has really, I think, it's like aggravating the problem. Like I had COVID in August, and now I have my multiple problems which I had before have aggravated. So this is what COVID did to education as well, and to girls' education specifically. It really amplified the problems which were already there. Out of school children problem in Pakistan has already been there, with the second number highest of children out of school under the age of 16, which is very disturbing, because we're looking at such a large number of children. 22.8 million is the number that has been quoted by the government pre-pandemic, and nearly 1 million children have been added to that number already, probably more, because we don't have that exact data, to be honest. So we see that at least there's more discussion around it, at least there's more awareness around it, and we talk about technology and access to technology during pandemic. We realized as a country that we were never prepared for this. Other countries, I think, acted fast. We acted fast in the sense that, whatever resources we had, the Federal Ministry of Education launched the Teletalim. No, it's not Teletalim. It's Teleschool. Yeah, Teletalim is the organization. So, which was a great sort of, a response to pandemic, and understanding that a lot of children will not have access to technology and internet. Same thing happened with the radio programs as well. So we still know that a lot of children, especially girls, were still not able to access these programs because of cultural reasons. A lot of girls, I know personally, who were pushed into early age marriages. This is like a huge problem, because naturally the poverty increased. I mean, these are real-time examples. I'm not talking about the stats and data that we've been looking at through different reports, but parents were unable to take care of the children. When you're not able to even put, one meal in a day on your table, that obviously brings a huge issue. And girls always seems to be at the worst end, at the worst end of the receiving of the problems. And in many cases, we saw, especially girls who were in secondary education, they never managed to complete their secondary education. If pandemic hadn't happened, then they would have been there. The other problem that we really sort of realized that, yes, majority of the children, including girls, boys, they just had no access to internet and laptops or smartphones or tabs or anything. The schools were unable to provide any online learning. But the bigger challenge was with the girls, because in cases where there was some opportunity for them to have online learning, they were restricted from it because of the cultural reasons. That a girl cannot go online, a girl cannot access internet. And we saw many problems like that. We ourselves tried to do an initiative, and we called it Tap the App. We were very excited about it. We thought, okay, we can do this. We can provide this to at least the girls in our schools, and they can do some online learning, if not all, because we also deliver accelerated learning programs. So that content was never digitized. So we thought we can do some work on it, and the girls can start to learn online. But there was a huge problem. The parents just would not allow them to have those tabs, right? So we tried to, come up with the most, cost-effective solution to, digital learning for girls, but it failed. It completely failed, and we just had to put a stop to it. There was no use doing that. A lot of time there was so much poverty that parents, just sold the tabs which were provided to the children because they needed the money to buy food, or the brother would just take the tab away for his own use. So again, if we were trying to support the girls, and because the girls were not coming to the school, they were in the home. Obviously, we were restricted. We had less control over that learning. So these are the real time sort of, examples that issues that we faced. The other thing was that, naturally when a girl is home, and this is an ongoing problem, it's an old problem. Girls are expected to take care of the household chores. They're supposed to take care of their younger siblings. And that increased, child labor increased hugely during this time. And that's for girls as well, not just for boys. We saw a lot of problems, on ground in that sense. So I think, many of those problems were there already, but a lot of work that I feel that we did in last many years on trying to engage with communities, on trying to make sure that the children come to the school, the girls particularly can come to school. A lot of work sort of got lost due to pandemic. The school closures had huge problems, though we had, I feel some success because our schools were community based, and our teachers are community based. So they managed to keep some contact with the girls, particularly. They would go door to door to the houses, keeping in touch, making sure they're not in trouble. The domestic violence and abuse also increased during this time. So we saw a lot of sad cases, actually, a lot of sad cases, and that was quite heartbreaking because the scale was so big that we were just unable to cater for everything. So we tried to do, for example, throughout the year, because the schools were closed, we moved on to ration drives for the families of our children. So throughout Pakistan, wherever our star schools are, in about 130 areas, we did ration drives to sort of just help the families so they don't push the children and girls particularly into child labor. And we can keep the girls engaged, we can keep the families engaged by just providing them the dry food supply. And that helped, that really helped, and we know that made a difference. But I think, when it comes to girls, when it comes to refugees, we work with Afghan refugees as well. We saw a lot of poverty, for too much poverty, that you could just see it, that, the poverty level has increased drastically. And that was really, so much issue with families, with their health, medical, all sorts of issues that, which are sort of real time issues. And these families just had no access at all. So I know we're on one side, I think as a country, we're doing a lot, whatever we can in our resources, but as we just didn't have enough to provide for these families. And we know a lot of problems. And I think early age marriage problem was probably the hardest to deal with, where just families, and we tried to counsel a lot of families around it, that please just, like there were some girls who would be giving their metric board exams now this year, and they're being married off right now, or they were married off last year because they just took them out of the schools and they said that that's it, we just can't handle it anymore and it has to be done. So very much real problems. I won't go into the stats and figures, I'm sure everybody has covered them before me. And I think these are the real time issues that we need to know and we need to address. I don't know how, really, because the scale is just so big. I mean, when you're talking about our own country, our own children in Pakistan, Pakistani children, 22, 23 million children probably are just, out of school right now. And then we have the Afghan refugees. So everybody's doing their best, in terms of with what resources we have. The civil society stepped in. The government tried to do whatever they can. But the scale is just too big. And that scares me, because when you think about the next 10 years and what's going to happen, and how are we going to deal with this learning poverty that we have. There was 75% learning poverty according to World Bank we have in Pakistan right now, which is probably also increased during pandemic. So it hasn't helped. I think pandemic has only been good for us because we've been able to highlight that issue further. I think, I feel that, before pandemic, when I used to talk about it, there was less engagement by stakeholders. I feel that, pandemic has helped me in that sense, that I see more and more these of, the events taking place, the discussions and stakeholders coming together, because they've realized that, we were never prepared, we're not prepared, and we need to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a little disorienting, because what I'm taking away from both your work and Mr. Abbas Khan's work is that even though we're trying to look at education for out-of-school children, for Afghan children, for girls, the problems underlying this factor sort of induces you people to end up helping them way beyond just enrollment, the quality of education. We end up having to deal with the poverty that the families are dealing with. And yeah, it's a tall order, sir. I've saved you for last, and I don't mean to build pressure, but the thing is, we do have the Special Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Department with us. And based on what you've also had the opportunity to hear all our panelists, I would like you to shed light on any special initiatives of the government, perhaps for girls or Afghan refugees or any marginalized community really in the times of COVID, and how we've, at least on a planning level, decided to cope with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Saidi, for providing me this opportunity. I'll focus on a few questions which already were posed to me. That's with reference to the special initiatives of the government regarding the girls' education, and special initiatives of the government for persons with disabilities, and any initiatives regarding digital schooling, and some of the few key challenges. First of all, just to highlight the scale of disaster and to show up the vulnerabilities, I will just refer to the etymology of the word disaster. It's a word composed of dis and aster. And dis has a negative connotation, not, against. And aster is, as you know, star. The astrology and other words formed from it. So the Greek would use this word when the stars were against them, the gods were against them. Now that would show the scale of any pandemic, epidemic, or disaster-like activity. So this time we also had this disaster. The stars were against us, but there is a distinction. This time the stars were against the processes and not against the products. I mean, those sectors which are marked by the processes, marked by the interactions, were affected the most, like tourism, education. But the sectors where the product was just there, I mean, IT and their products, food sector and products, they rather boomed instead of getting doomed. So we are the process sector where a lot of interaction takes place. Education is a continuous activity. And we have to face a lot of challenges in terms of interaction between the students and teachers, intra-system and out of the system challenges. So with respect to the special initiatives of the government of KP for the girls' education, whom we treat as the vulnerable group, the vulnerabilities were not same. I mean, the divide was not equal, but the vulnerable groups were affected in a dissimilar manner. Those who were vulnerable became more vulnerable. So I'll speak about girls' education and the children with disabilities and the refugees, etc. With respect to the girls' education, the government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, in order to retain and provide more access, initiated not only in the terms of the coping strategy under the planning and development program, but we initiated the girls' stipend program. So it was on 2 different years. One as a hybrid program for 2 districts. It was rupees 600 per month per girl at KG first grade, and then it was at the sixth grade. And for all other districts, for all other girls up to class 10, it was at a scale of rupees 200 per month for the entire year. So the objective was to provide maximum facilitation for those families which were poor and could not afford education for their girls. So that was an incentive. Similarly, under the education sector foundation, we also provided another voucher scheme to make the low-cost private schools accessible for girls' education. And not only new girls' schools were, girls' community schools were established under Elementary and Secondary Education Foundation, but more induction of female teachers were also ensured. So that's where we tackled the girls' education at all level. Similarly, for the persons with disabilities, we also have a share of persons which are differently able. As part of our annual education census, which is carried out by the Education Monitoring Authority of KP, we included a questionnaire, and that was based on the Washington group's short set of 6 questions under which we got information about various kind of disabilities amongst children. With the help of that, not only the teachers were trained regarding various disabilities like dyslexia or cognition or communication, but they were also referred to the special education institutions. To tackle the mobility problems, we introduced the ramps in the schools to enhance the access for those children. With reference to the digital schooling, a lot has been said. A lot has been said about digital initiatives. That was a time when many edtech companies contacted us and offered their services. We had presentations with almost all of them, and we came to know few new things. First of all, there is no standardization when it comes to the edtechs. A person comes, a company comes and contacts us that they have developed a software, but at the end we come to know that's only a learning management system. Yet another one comes up with a new idea, that's the robotics. Okay, this is not the time we can introduce robotics directly into the curriculum. I mean, it has to go under some kind of standardization, some rigorous test, and then it can be mainstream. Yet another one comes with a different platform that they have tested it in Africa, they have tested it in South Asia, in other parts of South Asia, but that does not conform to the single national curriculum, that does not find a place within our system. So the upshot is that there is no standard edtech policy at the moment with which we can calibrate other initiatives and could be able to adopt. Yet at our own, to help the students, we interacted with Noon Academy, for example. So they offer a platform for various learning materials, and we promoted it for our students, and 200,000 students got registered with Noon Academy and had access to learning material. Thereafter, they also provided scholarships and incentives for 16 of our board toppers, both girls and boys. And they also provided them with tablets and premium access for their content. And for every student, it was something, a package to the tune of 300,000 rupees at least. In the meantime, we were also in KP in the process of developing the scripted lessons. And that's the time when we put up these lessons, the scripted lessons for our teachers, which were originally built. And we just downloaded it for our own teachers who have the tabs And that's the way that we can ensure that standardized digital lesson plans are with the teachers. It not only promotes the quality education, but also ensures that standards are followed. And in the future, what we are going to do is that every school will receive a tablet or a laptop with all these softwares, with all these scripted lessons. And our objective is that on a one particular day, uh, same lesson plan for a particular class is presented so that we can track the learning, and subsequently we can track the learning losses, which already has been posed and presented as a big challenge in our education system. It's not only in KP, but throughout Pakistan. With this, a few words about the Afghan refugees. My senior colleagues have also pointed it out. Ladies and gentlemen, KP hosts more than half of the population of Afghan refugees in Pakistan, and they are doing a lot of great initiatives with help of GIC. There are 2-3 specific targeted interactions, activities which they are doing, and also in the education sector. With reference to what they are doing for education, I would just say that the Afghan refugees not only live in the refugee villages or camps, but they are also part of the regular communities where they pose challenges on the infrastructure, on the facilities, health and education, and others. That's where Commissioner of Afghan Refugees, UNHCR, GIZ are helping us out to ease the burden on the regular schools and infrastructure. They are helping to rebuild the schools, reconstruction of the schools in those areas which are hosting the Afghan refugees. I think that's a better approach, where the refugees get mainstreamed in a shorter time frame, and they become friendly with the population. The key challenges to education disparities and inclusive recovery are that COVID-19 has a negative economic impact, and that's why it has trickled down into further adverse effects on the education sector. It has decreased the expenditure of a family could afford for education, and that's where through the stipend program we are helping out the communities. There are access challenges, and we're trying to meet those challenges in terms of introducing the double shift schools, especially for the girls, whereby, for example, a primary school is converted into an evening middle school, and similar changes and interventions. At the end, since there is a lack of public awareness, we are trying to build more partnerships with the parents, with the community, through the parent-teacher councils. Besides providing these tabs and access to digital technology at the local level, we are trying to build strong communication, awareness, and mobilization of the parents and communities through parent-teacher councils. With this, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I believe that's the closest thing to a ray of hope we've had in this conversation, but this has been a very wholesome one. Before I open the floor to questions, I'm going to use my position and first pose the first one myself. I'm very interested, and if Ms. Bela is still with us, I believe she might also be interested in this. We've talked about lack of data, or at least timely data, and it's interesting because Ms. Pasha, you also mentioned 75% learning losses, right? And earlier in the presentation, Ms. Bela pointed out that it's even risen further to 85% now during times of COVID. So keeping in mind that during this time, a lot of processes and activities have been halted, and I'm sure data collection might also have suffered. Is there anything we can do, or are we doing to ensure that data can be collected more effectively, particularly for marginalized segments, like be it girls, Afghan refugees, or any other segments that are left out?
If I can add to that, as far I understand, at the Federal Ministry of Education level, there is some work going on bringing that data together and improving that data processes. So that's something very positive, because data-wise, we are very poor. I mean, and I keep saying again and again that the numbers that we quote, they're only estimated numbers. Please, let's just not go with them, because on-ground situation could be better or worse. It could be anything. On our end, we're also working on a data portal for girls' education. As part of we have an advocacy and policy program going on called Girls as Leaders of Tomorrow. And because data is such a huge issue, that's having a data portal specifically on girls' education that brings data together from all the provinces is very much needed. And this is something that one of the sort of thing that we're doing in 2022. We have also just produced data reports on girls' education per district based on the data that was already available from all the provinces, or the government data that was already available, the ASA reports. We've looked at Alif Alan and everything. So that's something that we've done on our end, which is those reports are available on our website as well. But I'm really looking forward to the data portal, because we need that live sort of data coming in that could facilitate the donors, the civil society, the government, in terms of planning any interventions for girls in Pakistan.
I just wanted to add that you have the disability data, which is also available under the ASER. So just wanted to share that with you. And I've sent the links to some of the data work on aserpakistan.org.
Yes, Ms. Bela, thank you. Would you consider marginalized societies being, you've talked about slums as well as urban areas, but I'm interested to see if IT or ASER reports are planning on spanning out to particularly cover Afghan children as well?
So yes, we are very interested. In fact, we had reached out to UNHCR to see if there was an interest. We would be happy to look at the learning challenges and other challenges, because we do a triangulated data collection process as a citizen-led assessment. We'd be happy to do it. But and in the urban slums, we have, of course, come across lots of migrant communities, not just domestic migration, but also migrant communities from Rohingya refugees, from Bangla refugees, Afghan refugees, which we have captured, including mother tongue. So we've got, for example, 16 mother tongues being spoken in one particular district, say in Karachi West. So yes, we've got all that data, and the capability is there to be used just about in a very user-friendly manner in any community. But the disability data is very powerful. It shows, compared to less than 5% disabled in our, sadly, our 2017 census, we are looking at almost 15.5% disability, according to the Washington Group and UNICEF tool of 15.5% in Pakistan for 5 to 16-year-olds. We've got that data, for 3 provinces. And I think those are very important aspects of how you're going to reach out to those very, very vulnerable groups. And that's disaggregated by gender and wealth.
Thank you. Shabasa,
Yes,
you want to...
regarding data, just a couple of points. Number one, that BISP has recently done a survey with reference to the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. They'll share the details later, but we have no access to that. That's a socio-economic aspect of the survey are more important to us, where the vulnerabilities will be established in a crystal clear manner. And that's how they can, they're also planning to, in fact, formulate new stipend programs. And it will be for the higher classes also based on these vulnerabilities. Secondly, the Education Monitoring Authority in KP carries out the annual census of schools in their areas, and And that's how we come to know data regarding 43 different indicators, and that also includes persons with disabilities. With reference to the vulnerable groups like Afghan refugees, yes, the commissionerate also has a data, and that's also shared with us, with the education department, by virtue of which we do plan for provision of the textbooks to Afghan refugees. And that's based on the number provided to us by them.
Thank you, sir. I believe Dr. Fariha has a point to add.
Yes,
Dr. Fariha, can you hear us? Yeah.
Yes, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. So just like 2 points that I would like to make. First of all, we must make use of this opportunity that the COVID has provided us. Of course, a lot of crisis, but a set of opportunities that COVID has bestowed upon us. And one of the opportunity is that it has accelerated the digital footprint in education. The much needed push has been given by COVID. The way education technology has accelerated, the way it has enhanced during COVID, we must make use of it. Secondly, there's another important aspect that the public policy paradigm needs to focus upon. That is that in majority of our public policy framework, we have supply-centric focus. And also similarly, it is the way in education. There has to be demand-centric educational policies, and the reason for this is that the main phenomena is that access does not mean usage. There's a whole barrier dimension in between that impedes individuals, especially the economically disadvantaged individuals, to make use of that access. So access of digital educational tools, access of education technology, or access of medium does not necessarily reflect into the usage of these mediums until these barrier dimension of how to use, of how to have knowledge, awareness, and addressing other problems in the periphery are done, and it won't work. And thirdly, there's a point that in terms of the learning levels of the economically disadvantaged, I think so mediums like the accelerated learning programs that PAGE, Pakistan Alliance for Girls Education, using, and Fajr is doing a phenomenal job in that. The Meal Foundation is using a similar pattern of library hardware, where software, where they're actually imparting education, and it allows students who are actually out of school to get equipped with this kind of education and ultimately transition into mainstream education through MOUs or DOUs signed with government, or this understanding with government. So these are the much needed programs for actually addressing the education of the vulnerable, and they must be adopted at a wide scale. And these organizations must be fully supported for these interventions at nationwide level. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Freya. Yes, Fajr, floor is yours.
I think that one thing that really needs to happen at strategic level is the data sharing. That does not even happen between. I mean, I know you mentioned that this would be sharing data, and that's great news because I know that wasn't happening before. So it's important that a lot of work is being done by various different departments, and we don't already have resources. We're short of resources already. So it's important that data that is being collected is shared between the government departments to start with, and with the civil society as well. So, and the donor bodies, so we can do better planning. So that's something very, very important that needs to happen. And in terms of the access to the technology, before that, what needs to happen is to look at the internet infrastructure in Pakistan. That is also very poor. We did some workshops back in November, and we looked at the whole edtech landscape in Pakistan, and we understood clearly how poor infrastructure is. So obviously multiple stakeholders have to come together to address this issue, and that's where, for example, Ministry of Information Technology there needs to be more discussions between the two the ministries of education and IT to improve that infrastructure. That would obviously help economically as well, because obviously, we're doing a lot of work around promoting freelancing, etc. So on that end, but it is needed for education too, because IT is generally now at the moment is seen that, we have young people who becoming freelancers, and IT is booming, and that's great news. But if we can strengthen that infrastructure on ground and more conversations can happen between the education and IT, then that would also really, really help create a huge impact. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. That would definitely add to digital schooling and assist that process. With that, the audience here, if there are any questions, please go ahead.
I lost the internet for a bit.
Yes, Ms. Bora, we'll come to you as soon as the question's done.
And we're working with some of the federal students as well. And in that particular scenario, we have added videos that are mostly 2 to 3 minutes on different topics of different subjects. The reason is that this is a middle school intervention, so that the teachers are able to understand what they're what they are supposed to teach. Because at the moment we have teachers who are confused, and we need to train them as well. We have so many people who come out to be teachers, but they are not trained at that level, and not for Urdu, not for English, not for many other subjects, histories. I mean, we are not making any. When I see most of the time when I'm observing different teachers or I'm visiting different schools, I see that these issues are there, and we need to cater them. And sometimes, of course, some issues have to be catered on the top level, but some issues need to start at the classroom level. So, anyways, my question is that which areas do you think need to get addressed first? And secondly, when you're talking about women and when you're talking about students, which areas do you think are actually in that scenario? Like, which are the vulnerable populations in this?
If I may, I'll sort of break this down into 2 or 3 parts. And Ms. Bela has a comment, so we'll go to her first, and then we can come to Shehbaz.
No, I just wanted to say that on the accelerated learning options that are becoming also widely available in Pakistan, there's the JICA accelerated program. There are others coming. The one that we've been working with more than 80,000 girls just now in the past 2 years, and before that also in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, is the Chalo Padho Badho, the teaching at the right level, which is a baseline, midline, endline 60-day program to help children who are at risk in schools or out of school, who are 6 and plus, and they can, within 60 days, reach grade 3 level learning to get them off to a good start. That material is freely available and has been externally evaluated. But also for primary, middle, and secondary, from 6 months to 18 months, even finishing matriculation for girls or boys who may have dropped out at grade 9 or even 10 or even grade 7 or 6. I think those we've managed to master well, and they are also freely available so that we can scale up our programs for so many kids who drop out after grade 5 or even before grade 5 or even at 9 and 10. So we are losing very important human resources. And I think that rigor of being able to measure baseline, midlines, and endlines is very important. That I think was being referred to earlier as well. So you can have randomized controlled trials and to see, what happens and whether in fact that learning is sustained or not. My position is that that should become a compulsory core teachers training at the primary level. So for 3 subjects, Urdu or Pashto or maths or English, you can actually make that part of your mainstream timetable and teachers can know how to work at that. So it's not just an NGO working on these, but the government in its mainstream programs can take it up in a big way. DCTE, for example, and PCTB has approved that content. So I think solutions are becoming widely available. They're becoming technology driven also where possible and appropriate. We still need high touch, and then we'll talk about high tech. The high touch bit is still very, very critical. And also, we've got monitoring tabs which are available, or the monitoring apps, which were done by AITB for us, for both Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and others, so that you have a very good, solid monitoring of the children as well, of their backgrounds, as well as where they're headed and how to monitor them during the 16-day accelerated program or the 6-month to 18-month accelerated program. I'd be happy to share that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Bela. So if I bring it back to the question, even Ms. Bela talks about teacher training, and you've clearly identified that as one thing that's particularly lacking. But taking that forward, if I pose it to the panel, what would be the absolute priority areas that you feel, if you had to choose just, let's say, a couple, what is the problem that we have to address first?
I believe that with respect to priority areas, I think all the components have priority one. Why? Because it's not just a part of education alone. We have to work on, we have to give access priority one. We have to, at the same time, we have to work on retention. We have to work on equity, right? Similarly, we have to go for development of more infrastructure and improve our governance. And at the same time, we have to work on the quality of teachers and make the learning material relevant. All these things have to move in tandem together, and all have priority one. With respect to data and availability, government of Pakistan is also taking some initiative. I would just highlight one here, and that is the interventions planned by USF, this Universal Services Fund, to improve more telecom services availability across Pakistan. And that would also help us out in the newly merged districts and in the remotest part of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Their initiative aims at providing subsidies to the telecom companies, telecom operators, to bear the initial infrastructure cost. Thereafter, after the rollout, they will have the same charges. We have regional disparities and personal disparities. With respect to the regional disparities, I must highlight that, say, in Kohistan, Badagram, and a few other areas, we don't have enough female teachers to teach our girl students. For that purpose, we have relaxed our rules of area-based recruitment. For instance, especially for Badagram, Torgar, and Kohistan districts, we have allowed the district management to hire teachers from Abbottabad and Haripur, and that's relaxation of the general policy. So all these policy interventions and actual development interventions have been planned at the district level as well as at the provincial level.
Thank you very much. That's great to hear, because that's an real-time issue in KP, so that's good to hear. I think, when we talk about immediate and prioritizing interventions or what actions we need to take, teachers training is the top priority. I mean, I keep saying invest in teachers, invest in teachers. Uh, Looking at our issues in Pakistan, yes, we want to do edtech, we want to do lots of amazing things, but we also need to look at the scale of the problem. I rather educate 100 teachers, 100 students than 10 students, because obviously bringing a child into school, not only not only educating them, but then we're also saving them from a lot of social issues like the child labor and early marriages and all, and abuse and all sorts of things. So this is why I say training teachers. uh, Teachers training at middle level and secondary level is a huge problem, especially in rural areas. This is something that we've been looking at since we've been running ALPs at primary level, which is the 3-year program with JICA for the last 3 years, and our cohorts are now completing their primary education throughout Pakistan. The biggest problem for us is that what are these children are going to do next, because we don't want them dropping out. And the only solution we have, because in majority of these areas there are no middle schools and secondary schools, especially for girls, so it is to just keep that intervention running, but at middle and secondary level then. But the problem is that you have no teachers in those areas who are trained to deliver. Like you said, they can't even train to deliver Urdu programs, maths, English basics. So not last year, year before last year, we developed we didn't develop this online platform. We did a collaboration with a UK-based organization that provided us with their training programs, that a training platform that they have successfully used in India in partnership with UNICEF. And that was very simple platform. And through that platform, we nearly trained around 12,000 teachers, even during pandemic as well. And we created our own bite-sized training programs, teaching them Urdu, maths, how to teach Urdu, maths, English, basic subjects, but more focused on middle level. And that was very successful because they didn't have to have a laptop. It wasn't like an online training platforms like we have, but those trainings were delivered in the emails. You go through the content, you then go online and do simple assessments, and we saw a lot of impact through that. So we're hoping to continue doing that, because that really targets the teachers, and we work with many female teachers mostly. That really helped us. So that's something, but I think that needs to be done on a larger scale, much larger scale, so we can address that problem. Secondly, where we have the schools, secondary schools in particular, government schools, head teachers leadership training is very important. And these are the sort of things that, these are low cost interventions, but can create a lot of impact, because head teachers, what we find is head teachers lack in leadership. Once head teachers are actually properly trained, then they can really create better impact in those communities where those schools are based, especially for girls. What we also find is, unfortunately, these are real-time experiences, that, if you go into a government school, and if it's a girls' school, then what we find is that teachers don't really invest knowledge in the girls, because there's perception there that these girls are just going to be married off anywhere, or they're just going to drop off from school. So why do this? So that's a big challenge which needs to be addressed. We have done some work around developing a special training program that we do for our teachers in the star schools, so they understand the importance of delivering that knowledge to girls as well, and the parents and the communities and the boys that comes to our school, so we can change that perception around girls just don't get married and don't just drop off, but then can look at career path as well for themselves. So these are the sort of things that I think, teachers can make a huge difference. I keep saying that, you look 30 years back, and we have amazing people working in the government who have studied in their villages, sat under the tree, no infrastructure, and they're doing amazing right now, because the quality of teaching was very, very good at that time, and that made the difference. So edtech to me comes next step, because we're far away from having a proper infrastructure, internet infrastructure. We're far away from having those resources where we can provide edtech learning. I would love to, but we don't have the resources. So we need to be very realistic about these things. So if we can have a short-term, mid-term, and a long-term plan where we can really look at our issues, we can plan in terms of what needs to be done immediately, and then what's the next step, and then the next step after. So something along those lines. Community learning, I love, because it has been hugely successful in our environment. For girls particularly, because parents find it much safer for girls to go into a school which is near their home and taught by teachers from within the community. So it's providing that, creating that ease, and it's not, it's not costly. I think, it's a very cost effective program, can amazingly bridge the gap between community learning and then mainstreaming those children into mainstream schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Further, just with the continuation of your points regarding the training of teachers and engaging the community, I guess it's very important to say here the role of the CSOs to sensitize the parents and the community and bring their awareness on the importance of girls' education, and particularly that will help to address the challenge of cultural barriers regarding girls' education. So over to
Thank you. I'm sorry we have time for one last question. I don't want to keep you all from tea, particularly not our panelists. If you could kindly make it brief.
Very quickly. My name is Ryan Henson and I'm a working journalist about all my life as a working journalist. My daughter would go to the school, there would be science subjects, which she wanted to continue with arts, so she was brought to Samba School for Girls. Now these schools have been handed over to the district. And the school is so good that she immediately showed a marked improvement. And I know other schools as well, Adil Najam and this Kalim also went to the Samba school. What happened at the federal level must sink at the other provincial, especially the level of so far. So I become interested to ask you a question because you mentioned the policy, these processes and the products. You're talking about the products, the ideas, they might have been good, but the policy, the processes, there I think they are lacking. Why you're doing it? The question is simple. Handing it over to the district government and the mayor and the councillor, and they will hand over to privatize because the buildings are good. That is the main attraction. And Tariq Benori has analyzed in the code that I was removed unceremoniously because private parties were interested in the real estate attached to the university. Thank you.
Your question falls in the political domain, which is, I mean, not mine. But from the policy point of view and from the utility point of view, as far as this FDE matters are concerned, I mean, it's being placed under the district government. And you said that it's going to be good. Good or bad? Yes. No, what's your point of view? I mean, yes. Oh. Yes, that's more speculative. I think at this time it is more speculative. You might agree or disagree on the present ordinance which has been issued by the President of Pakistan regarding devolution of education at the federal level to the district level. I mean, this is what is happening in Islamabad only. It's not specific to KP or I believe for the other provinces. Presently, part of the management regarding the district education is with the district management presently. I mean, like the financial aspects are looked after by the deputy commissioner, and that's the account 4 where it goes. In our system, in KP, the devolution is even down to the school level. I mean, it's the parent-teacher councils which have been made responsible to run their affairs. I just quote here an example of PTCs. PTCs, the parent-teacher councils, have been provided with rupees 30 lakh per school, per PTC, for one PTC to look after 6-7 different facilities. And so if there's a classroom missing, to make an additional classroom, construction of a group latrine, the solarization and provision of a water supply, the construction of a boundary wall. And now they are going to be empowered to hire teachers to make up deficiency for the teachers over there. I mean, when it comes to the government, in contrast to the private sector, government has an issues of scale. We have to not only look after equity, but equality also. When we have to roll out our programs, then it has to be, I mean, for every area, for every region, every gender, all aspects have to be seen. We can discuss the political aspects in person later.
Like, like I said, politics has entered the room, and these conversations should be carried over with tea refreshments so that it's easier to handle. Sir, I believe you had a question. If it's a brief one, I can give you the floor now. Otherwise, we can continue this over tea.
So we will carry this forward. Okay, we have a brief one, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my question is directed to Sarah from JIC. My question is directed to Ms. Pajar. It's about that you said that the laptops and everything, the smartphone was provided to girls, but it failed. So has there been any discourse or any talk about this thing, that what other measures can be adopted to cater for that need? Because the girls cannot be left behind, so we have to do something about their education. So is there any discourse about that?
No, absolutely. I think, during pandemic, the biggest problem was school closure. So the learning was taking place at home. So that was a huge issue. What we generally find is that community mobilization, parental engagement has huge positive impact. I mean, we have teams provincially, and they work in various villages, etc. before we open a school, and we tend to have really good results. One thing that we have, I believe, once the girls are now back in school, so we can start to introduce technology where we have electricity and internet, right, to start with. Secondly, what we've also done is that we've been working with Council of Islamic Ideology very closely for the last many months on engaging ulamas in regions, areas, especially where we face more barriers to girls' education, more challenges, more restriction, because the mindset needs to change, and that's been they've been hugely supportive. So we've been going through, and we're still going through a process of engagement of ulamas and sensitizing them, so they can then put that message out on our behalf as ambassadors for girls' education. So girls are allowed to go to schools, girls are allowed to access online learning, for example, whatever that may be. So these are the sort of things that we're looking at based on our experience in certain areas where we found it really, really hard for girls to be engaged during the pandemics, especially. But I think, in most cases, when girls are coming to school and we're working with them, even pre-pandemic, we've been doing a lot of work through laptops, even if there's just one laptop in the classroom. We've been doing that previously as well, and parents they've not had an issue because they know they're in a safe environment and they're not doing anything else on the computers but just learning. So that's been something been positive in that sense. What we need to do is make sure that parents understand that even if a girl is using a tablet at home or a laptop at home, then that's okay. We do need to do, I think, work around sensitizing our children in terms of use of online, social media, etc. So we don't have problems. I was just speaking at Bukarul Nisa College just the other day before, and this problem was openly discussed in terms of how much problem girls are having, because they're the engaged group, they have access to technology, internet, etc., but then how much problem social media is causing for them. So these are the sort of things that we do also need to keep in mind and address at the same time. The online safety, cybercrime, all of that. I know we've been working as a country, the government has done a lot of work around cybercrime and strengthening the rules there, but implementation, awareness for children, particularly girls, in terms of their rights, who to go to for help. These are the sort of things that I think we need to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pasha, and thank you to all our panelists, Ms. Pela, Dr. Fariha, for joining us online, for all of you making the time to come here and your insightful comments. This has been a very fruitful discussion. Thank you all. Thanks to our audience for being part of this. With this, I would like to officially close the session and invite you all to join us for tea down below. Thank you again. For the panelists and panel organizers, if you could all just line up for a quick photograph. Thank you so much.
you.